WWE champion, the world champion, together in the ring at the same time. What a sight. Only like you said, JR.
Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on those notifications. And once you're done, leave a comment down below and I just might end up responding. When you have a history as in-depth and rich as World Wrestling Entertainment's, it's pretty hard not to end up with a few skeletons stuck in the closet. And when your company is headed off by Vincent Kennedy McMahon, a man who once fought and beat God in a tag team match on pay-per-view, tossed out the N-word while passing by Booker T, again, we had to pay to see that, and pitched an unaccepted incest angle with his daughter, and then counter-offered by saying it could be with her brother instead.
So how could I even play that out? I can't fake kiss my dad like we were in love or something. I mean, it's just revolting all the way around.
Yeah, you might need a couple closets for all those skeletons, actually. I'm D Wicked from Watch WWE, and today we'll be taking a look into the darker side of pro wrestling and exploring some of those wildest moments in WWE's past that they've tried pretty hard to keep under wraps. Yeah, sorry, Vince. Well, there's not really a good place to start, so why not just kick it off on a low note? Perhaps the lowest note in all of wrestling history, as Owen Hart met his maker on May 23rd, 1999 during the Over the Edge pay-per-view. The very, very unfortunately named pay-per-view saw Owen Hart, going by a ridiculous superhero blue blazer gimmick, fall over 70 feet to his death after the harness carrying him to the ground released too early.
I have the unfortunate responsibility to let everyone know that Owen Hart has died.
Millions of people watching at home, and even worse, the thousands of fans live in attendance that night, just witnessed a man they probably really loved die. Not just die, the dude dropped 70 feet to the ground. There's obviously no footage, and even if there was, we're not going to be showing you that. But you can imagine just how brutal that must have been to witness. The controversy continued on in the night as WWE made the decision, the very bold decision, to keep going with the pay-per-view, to continue it. And this is where the secrecy lies, as WWE will never bring up the circumstances surrounding Owen's death. At the time, WWE had only been ahead in the Monday Night Wars against WCW for around a year, as long as WCW had in control. So they were still doing anything and everything they could to draw in ratings, hence the grandiose, completely unnecessary stunt that cost Owen his life. Bret Hart stated multiple occasions that he blames Vince McMahon and his ratings obsession for the death, as well as believing Vince kept the pay-per-view running because he valued said ratings over his own roster, even in literal life or death scenarios. When questioned, Vince claimed he had a lot to say about Owen Hart, but it was far too soon. Alright, fair, but besides a very corporate, soulless message in the Calgary Sun, he's really still yet to speak more on Owen's death till this day.
You know, this was a tragic accident. It's a tragic accident. Don't try and put yourself in the spotlight here, okay? This was an accident. Do you understand what I'm saying?
While Owen Hart may be the only wrestler to die inside of a WWE ring, he is far from the only casualty caused by professional wrestling. The intense workload and travel schedule puts a lot of stress onto the people, and especially their bodies. So the drug culture behind the scenes has almost always been a very real thing.
It's not like I had to have something. I could put away this and go to this. I could, stop doing this and move over to this.
Painkillers and booze, a deadly combination that just seems to hit the right spot for too many guys, from names like Shawn Michaels to Scott Hall. These two both had massive, widely known drug problems, but the backstage culture meant that it was almost never treated like a serious issue, and in fact, WCW ended up using Scott Hall's drug use and drinking in a storyline. Like he was really an alcoholic. That's fucked up. WWE don't plan on showing you that footage anytime soon. They were pissed enough in 2011 when ESPN did a piece on Scott Hall and just how bad his demons had gotten and just how little help he was being given. Hall recounted a moment with Shawn where they had to wait a few moments to tell if his heart was even still beating, and then when Michaels said yeah, Scott passed him even more shit to take.
Hey Shawn, what, Race? Your heart still beating? Wait a minute. Yeah, here, take half of this.
The The drug culture is not just painkillers and alcohol though, because steroids have played an even bigger role in the life of pro wrestling over the years, and it's not exactly been a positive one, as 1993 nearly saw the fall of the World Wrestling Federation after Hulk Hogan admitted Vince McMahon had been supplying his locker room with the juice.
Well, I mean, at the time when I got in the professional wrestling business, not trying to point fingers, but everybody in all the sports industries were using it.
He's pushed that far under covers, yet steroids would come back to haunt the company in 2007 with the death of Chris Benoit. In fact, not just steroids, but the entire structure of professional wrestling was put on blast after reports came out about the condition of Chris Benoit's brain. You've heard it before, but it really bears repeating. After all of the bumps to the head, all the drug usage, everything about how Chris Benoit lived his life, he was found with a brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient and had an advanced form of dementia similar to those of retired NFL players who fell into very similar pitfalls of depression and causing harm.
It's not the world of wrestling drove him to alcohol or the world of wrestling drove him to drugs. No, you do that to yourself.
Despite a tribute show the weekend after his passing, once WWE learned how exactly Benoit went out, his name was scrapped from the history books and hasn't been given a second thought since.
The WWE champion, the world champion, together in the ring at the same time. What a sight! Only like you said, JR.
Alright, if we keep up on this path of deep drug usage and wrestlers dying, I'm going to walk out of this with depression. So let's just mix it up a little bit, alright? It's a oddly popular conspiracy theory that I'm kind of surprised so many people believe this one. It's the McMahons. I talked plenty about Vince and his family already, but there's been word that ever since the days of Vince McMahon Sr., the true McMahon family has always been hidden behind closed doors. That's right. Instead, an actor was hired to take over as Vince McMahon Jr., the man we now know as Vincent Kennedy McMahon. There's debate over the conspiracy, some sides arguing that the actor playing the Vince we see on screen's real-life family were cast in the roles of his on-screen family, i.e. Vince's actor is actually the father of the Shane and Stephanie actors, but none of their names actually end in McMahon, while the other side argues that every single one of them is an unrelated actor since they really don't look all that similar. The real heirs to Vince McMahon Sr., the current McMahon family though, according to myth, have been hidden away in Stamford, Connecticut and still to this day haven't made their presence known. It's a pretty crazy curveball idea, not guaranteed at all, but I really needed something that wasn't wrestlers dying, so let the speculation commence down in those comments. We've talked enough about these McMahons and their WWE bold nonsense. Sure, they deserve some flack, but so does every single other wrestling promotion in history that inspired or was inspired by WWE. No company is perfect, but no company has ever been so opposite of perfect as WCW, WWF's main competition of the 1990s. There is an ungodly amount of nonsense hidden beneath the soil where WCW's grave stands. First off, the racism was sort of off the charts. WWF is no slouch to the occasional slave character, don't get me wrong, but when Vince Russo was hired to WCW in late 1999, one of the very first interviews he gave included a little tidbit about how, as an American, he didn't want to tune into an American wrestling show and see some Japanese or Mexican dudes. He doesn't care about them. Vince Russo was the man in charge of booking WCW. And, well, he definitely put his own words into practice. Foreigners almost never picked up wins. Juventud Guerrera was once thrown onto commentary as a joke despite knowing almost zero English.
I just gotta take some more juice. Extensive training program, huh? Yeah. A lot of metrics.
And according to reports, the N-word and similar slurs were not too uncommon backstage by a select few higher-ups. And minorities were far from the only people unhappy backstage, too, as pretty much everyone was. Since no one was really in charge in WCW and they had all sorts of huge names from yesteryear, the main event was constantly filled with the 40 to 50-year-olds of the 80s. With all the young up-and-comers, your Jerichos, your Mysterios, Eddie Guerreros, were all left mistreated on a permanent undercard they would never be allowed to rise from. They'd be frequently called vanilla midgets during production meetings and told that they would never ascend from where they're at now. They would then find themselves locked into their contracts via WCW loopholes that kept them there far longer than anyone wanted, and despite the fact that they were making significantly less money than the entire main event scene, would have all of their royalties on stuff like merchandise sent to the top company men instead. Despite Jericho claiming he made a fraction what the top guys were making in WCW, his wife once bought one of his dolls, a Chris Jericho and Dean Malenko set, but noticed that the tag read out Hulk Hogan and Sting, meaning that those guys got the kickback. And it wasn't just Chris Jericho who was abused, disrespected, and then locked into shackles he couldn't free himself out of. It was most of WCW.
Most of my problems, not a whole lot, but with Ole, he was a bad man. Even if he knew your name, he would call you. He didn't.
Alright, I wanted to take at least a few entries to not talk about straight up tragedies, but we'll be finishing the video on the one name WWE once heard less than any other: the fabulous Moolah. In short, Moolah rose to the top of women's wrestling far before it was as established as it is now, and she just took over. Far before the McMahons controlled wrestling, Moolah had already been on top and started training the women. Since she had been on top for so long and had a legitimate monopoly over every top women's title, she had all the ins with the top promotions, so Moolah had total monopoly on women's wrestling. It was get trained by Moolah or don't get into the business. Period. This was not just one part of the country, this was women's wrestling, and it stayed that way for decades. Keep this in mind throughout the rest of the video because this exploitation gets very uncomfortable. Everyone who wanted to train with Moolah was immediately signed into a contract that made Moolah their automatic booker, taking 25% of all income. And that income wasn't a lot to begin with anyway. Trainees were then required to rent out apartments on Moolah's property and pay for their own utilities, making it nearly impossible to pay off their debts. Due to this, pretty much anyone who wanted to be a women's wrestler was controlled by Moolah. She controlled their lives, and multiple trainees came forward over the years to fully agree with that front. If only that's all we had heard out of trainee confessions. While some came forward to say Moolah would take even more than 25% for booking just to then refuse to book them if she didn't like you, some came forward with far darker secrets. Moolah was a well-known pimp of the era who often provided different wrestling promoters of the day with unsuspecting females for sex. The women were shipped off to the promotions in bulk with no prior knowledge of what was happening, and if they refused to have sex, the thing they didn't know that was gonna happen, they would be In fact, some girls, like the most notorious accuser, Sweet Georgia Brown, were apparently drugged, and intentionally turned into an addict just so Moolah had the ability to control her. Another notable victim, Sandy Parker, was constantly pressed and harassed by Moolah for being a lesbian, this despite the fact that Moolah had been caught before abusing alcohol and having forceful sex with her own trainees. So basically, evil took human form, and then that human form took control of an entire industry for about 35 years.
In the world of women's wrestling, there's one irrefutable legend that will always stand above the rest.
And those are some of the darkest secrets in pretty much pro wrestling history at this point. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments down below. After liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and notifications and that bell.